blood on sand. From the diary of Father Mathieu Dupont, 1876. Day 43. The Chemenzot marshes devour not only feet and boats, they swallow souls. Whispers beneath the surface call out in the nights. The locals whisper a name, Inzot Ka. They bow to the water as if it were a living beast and sing when the sun departs. One porter vanished in the night. Only the trail of a tail remained, thick as a tree trunk. I hear singing in the stagnant water beneath the boat. If you find these pages, run. Run from the river's maw. Emily and Robert, a middle-aged couple, had always dreamed of a journey that would become something more than just a tourist trip. Behind them lay years of shared life. Their daughter had started college, and they decided to celebrate by immersing themselves in the very heart of wild, unexplored Africa. It seemed to them that Africa was a place where time slowed its pace, where one could feel the primordial power of nature, far from the modern world and its noise. They wanted to visit safaris, observe the life of local tribes, untouched by civilization. Along the way, their local guide told them there were even wilder and less studied places, and he could arrange a trip to one of them. Their destination became the secluded, almost mythical village of the Lunzambi tribe, located in the depths of the swampy jungles of South Sudan, where the Nile breaks into a labyrinth of channels and treacherous backwaters known as the Chemenzot marshes. The locals called this place the river's maw, where, according to legend, the river spirit dwelled. Juba, South Sudan. In the stuffy lobby of a cheap hotel, a ceiling fan lazily circulated the smell of old wood and sour wine. Robert held a worn safari map in his hands and tried to smile at Emily, though the smile came out forced. Tomorrow we'll be there. Real Africa. A real adventure, he said. Emily nodded and looked through the murky window, beyond which wind ruffled ripples on the water. She had never liked rivers since childhood. Or water. Riel. She repeated quietly, almost to herself. At the counter, an old boatman, thin, with skin like wrinkled bark, was conversing with their guide. His eyes were muddy yellow, like a stagnant puddle under the tropical Sunday. He noticed their gaze, cut off his sentence, and approached closer. "You're going to Lunzambi?" he said hoarsely, as if scraping words from his throat with pebbles. "Yes," Robert answered. "Local tribe, ancient rituals. They say it's the real Africa." The boatman leaned slightly closer, so that Emily caught the rotten smell from his clothes. "The river's maw doesn't forgive strangers," he said. "Those who go there return empty, like a dried well, and those who don't return, they become the river." Robert laughed shortly, tensely. "Thanks for the warning." Emily squeezed his hand so tightly that her nails left white crescents on his skin. "Just local legends, right?" The old man tapped his temple with his finger, muttered something in his language, touched Emily's forehead with a dirty nail, and then just as quickly stepped back, disappearing into the darkness of the lobby. Somewhere outside the window, water splashed again, and this time the splash sounded like heavy breathing. The guide, a wiry old man with hands burned to the color of old copper, took them through the maze of marshes in a motorboat that smelled of gasoline and stagnant water. The shore greeted them with silence and smoke. The huts of Lunzambi grew straight from the earth, reed and clay, intertwined as if they hadn't been built but excavated. The inhabitants were tall and silent, Their eyes reflected the firelight in such a way that it seemed there was nothing in their eyes. No fear, no curiosity. His eyes seemed empty as a moonless night, but something mad and commanding could be read in them. He wore a necklace of bleached bones and an amulet of enormous crocodile teeth. After the main tourist reception program, for a modest fee he agreed to show them the sacred stones. Emily noticed how the priest's fingers gripped the crocodile tooth amulet when he whispered, "Nzotka waits, the river is always hungry." Emily heard this voice somewhere in her back, as if someone had placed a palm between her shoulder blades, cold and damp. Emily and Robert felt like strangers, but this alienation only intensified their anticipation of unusual experiences. In the evening, the Loon Zombie tribe held a celebration. Fires burned brightly on the banks of the Nile, casting bizarre shadows on the water. Rhythmic, hypnotic drum beats pierced the air, merging with ancient, guttural songs. Dancers moved in rhythm, their bodies writhing in bizarre ritual movements dedicated to the river spirit, the ancient hunter. Emily and Robert sat by the fire, enchanted, feeling themselves part of something primordial and powerful. In some songs, it seemed to them they could hear notes of supplication addressed to an unknown force, but they attributed this to the exotic nature of the place. Nzot Ka, river spirit, ancient hunter, whispered Naquaro as they passed by, his voice sounding like the grinding of stones. The river is hungry. It is always hungry. Emily and Robert exchanged puzzled glances, but smiled, assuming this was part of the local folklore. The day before, they had noticed that despite being close to the river, no crocodiles were visible, and the tribe's children played calmly right at the water's edge. This created a false sense of security, instilling the thought that here they were safe from the usual dangers of wild nature. In the evening, the tribe held a celebration. The fires burned dimly, smoke spread low like a shroud. The songs didn't sound like they did during the day in other villages. They brought no joy. They pounded in their heads like the sound of stones against a riverbed. The dances were slow, angular, with movements resembling snake strikes or the curves of roots in a swamp. There was something disturbing in the rhythm, as if this rhythm was tearing the night into strips.
Robert drank local moonshine and smiled. "This is incredible. Real Africa. Do you see, Emily?" Emily saw. She saw how Naquaro sat by another fire, looking at them, gripping his amulet, and silently whispering something. It seemed he wasn't singing with the others. He was talking to something that crawled behind his back in the darkness. Soon after dinner, as the fires began to die down and the songs fell silent, Emily and Robert fell asleep in their hut, lulled by the sounds of the night Nile. They fell asleep quickly, too quickly. The sleep was heavy and sticky. Emily woke when she heard low singing. It wasn't coming from the hut, it was coming from below, from the earth, from the water beneath her. This wasn't the cheerful singing from the evening, but something deeper, more mystical, accompanied by a muffled, rhythmic sound. Her heart began beating anxiously. She carefully shook Robert awake and quietly left the hut. To her horror, she discovered that the village was empty. The fires smoldered, throwing red sparks onto the wet sand. All the locals had vanished. No one was there. And what was even more terrifying, the other pair of tourists they had met upon arrival had also disappeared. From where the river flowed into the lake, torches burned in the distance, illuminating unclear silhouettes. From there came that same hypnotic singing and dull, rhythmic beats. Emily hastily woke Robert. "Come on, we need to see what's there," she whispered. And although instinct screamed of danger, an inexplicable force pushed them forward. They carefully made their way through the tall grass toward the source of light and sound. The tall grass clung to their legs as if alive. The closer they came, the stronger became the acrid, putrid smell that seemed to emanate from the water itself. Robert walked ahead, gripping her hand, but didn't look back. What they saw made their blood freeze in their veins. In the torchlight, they made out an ancient, primitive altar of dark stones covered with incomprehensible, weathered hieroglyphs that seemed to crawl across its surface. Around the altar, in a semicircle, stood the silent figures of the Lunzambi tribe, their faces impenetrable and lit only by flickering flames. Behind them, vertically, rose tall, roughly hewn wooden stakes. To some of them were tied victims that same pair of tourists, as well as another figure unknown to Emily and Robert. The victims' eyes were wide with terror, their bodies trembling. From the depths of the dark waters, where the river flowed into the lake, the water began to churn and foam wildly. From this boiling whirlpool, something slowly rose. This was not simply an animal, not a crocodile as they might have imagined, but a creature whose size and age exceeded human understanding. Its scaled sides shimmered like stars in a bottomless abyss, reflecting the torchlight. Its eyes, burning with green flame, seemed to look through the victims, as if seeing not them but something beyond time. Its maw, studded with teeth like obsidian daggers, opened, and the air filled with a sound that was neither a roar nor a scream, but something that tore the very fabric of the mind, making their bodies tremble and their consciousness cling to reality.
One moment, and it was all over. Nzotka, the river spirit, the ancient hunter, crashed down upon the altar. The screams broke off and dissolved in the tribe's singing. The sacrifices had been made. The tribe remained motionless, in silent, eerie reverence, their faces showing not a shadow of compassion, only deep, ancient respect for the entity they were appeasing. In that moment, Emily realized that the tribe wasn't looking at the victims, it was looking at the river, praying to it. Emily and Robert, having become unwilling witnesses to the horrifying ritual, fled back to the village in wild, primordial terror, not choosing their path, stumbling in the darkness. They ran to their hut, with trembling hands barricading the entrance, but perfectly understanding that it was useless. They were cut off from the world, and they were being hunted not by a mere predator, but by something far more powerful and ancient. They heard heavy slapping on the sand, dull thuds against the hut's walls, heavy, fetid breathing outside. Their pursuer didn't try to break down the door or windows. It seemed to enjoy their fear. They heard how Nzotka circled around the hut. Its presence felt like wild cold inside their bodies, chilling them to the bone, and that same putrid smell. It could take them at any moment, but seemed to wait until fear flowed out of them like blood. By dawn, all sounds had ceased. The first rays of sun touched the river, and the world became again what it had been during the day. Emily and Robert, pale and trembling but alive, crawled out of their hut. The village looked ordinary again. The inhabitants of the Lunzambi tribe calmly returned to their business as if the previous night had never existed. No bodies, no traces of the ritual, nothing that could remind them of the events of that mad night. When Emily, barely holding back tears, tried to speak with Naquaro, his eyes, black as the waters of the night Nile, looked through her. The tribe maintained complete silence. Their faces were impenetrable. They didn't answer questions, showed neither sympathy nor surprise. Within half an hour, without unnecessary words, their guide loaded them into his boat. He silently took them away from the village, past the maze of marshes. Emily and Robert understood perfectly that they would never have escaped this area on their own. They left the Kemenzot marshes, but the horror remained with them forever. They had seen the eyes. They had felt the smell. They had heard the sounds. They had seen how the river spirit demanded its tribute. The Nile continued to flow, keeping its secrets and its Nzotka, the ancient hunter. And no one could explain why these strangers, whom fate had chosen as victims, survived. But now their lives were forever marked by this horror, and with every splash of water they would remember the burning green eyes of the river spirit.